Krish, it's been 3.5 years since your book's been out.
Yes.
And you have a wildly popular Instagram page.
Yes.
You've been at panels like this one. You've interacted with chefs from around the country, researchers, farmers. So I think the question really is, after all of this, what is cooking? Is it a science or an art?
Cooking, I think it's both. Uh, there are elements of it that are just craft. In fact, not I wouldn't even say it's art in the sense that somebody just cooking at home, making the same thing again and again, or a chef cooking that same dish, night after night, and getting the, go to Paragon and that biryani tastes exactly the same, like every time. That is not art. That is craft. That is just simply being able to take what may have been originally an art, but turn it into a series of things that you can replicate, right? It's the difference between engineering versus, it's also the difference between an engineer and a mechanic, right? I mean, engineer barely touches the car, only looks at blueprint and theory. That's what happens before you make the car. But once the car is made, how it works and all of that is more of a mechanic's job. So I think everything, cooking has a craft and an engineering element. And once you master that, then you can apply your creativity to make something amazing, right? To invent new things, to delight people with new layers of flavor and so on. So I think most people tend to overestimate the art part, which is really what Masala Lab is about, which is that most of the time when you're at home and cooking, that's just craft. There's very little art involved there.
But there's the other part to it as well, where now, ever since Heston Blumenthal across the world made molecular gastronomy such a big thing, the art of gels, the art of foams has become commonplace enough for those who cook, and everyone wants to do that. And that's applying science to cooking, and in a lot of cases, it's without enough creativity or art.
Yes.
So, what do you think about that aspect of it?
So I think it's interesting how we seem to think that if I see some fancy foam or some interesting new texture, we think it's science, but somehow the dal chawal or a basic chatti choro or fish curry and all of that is not science, right? I think that comes from one, the familiarity. I mean, if it is something that our grandmothers have been cooking, surely it cannot be science, right? It is. I think anything that is novel, we somehow are happy to associate that with science. Anything that has just been happening for a long time, that's just tradition, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if 10 years from now, all these newer molecular gastronomy things won't be considered science. Because you'll have machines that will do it at home, right? So 50 years ago, the very act of somebody pressure cooking dal and getting it so soft so quickly would have appeared like how foams and these new technologies appear to us now, right? So as Arthur C. Clarke says, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic at that point of time. But eventually, once you understand it, the sort of mystique goes away. So I think that the same thing will happen to all of these newer technologies, which now are like science, sous vide and brining and all these other new. But eventually, I think it'll all become, once it's available at home, then I think it becomes well, pretty soon we'll anyway have robots to assist us with cooking anyway. I think we'll probably take it for granted at that point.
I think that's my next question, because
Yes.
taking on from your last session, the idea of AI, robots, and food.
Yes.
And what is the future of cooking, essentially?
See,
Both in the West and in
right.
India, actually.
See, in general, I mean, if you take a longer arc of history, the progress of humanity has fundamentally been about trying to do less and less work to get produce more and more output. You take any discipline, that's how it is, right? Agriculture. We were just hunting and gathering, and then we figured out the technology of saying, you know what, I'm going to domesticate some plants and I'm going to clear this entire field and grow only that. And then I will invent fertilizers for it. And then I will invent crop rotation. I will invent genetic modification. And so the agricultural productivity itself has been exponentially kind of growing, right? We're able to get like tons and tons of rice from like 1 acre of land. In a way, 100 years ago, we were producing like a third, right? People get very scared when they see that modern day chickens are so large. I said, yes, your rice plant is also grown by the same size, and it's not just the animals that we eat. So to that end, this is just a continuous journey where let's be honest, right? I mean, nobody wants to be slaving in the kitchen. You would rather be doing other things. You still want home cooked delicious food, but I think it's a very Indian thing to say, no, it has to be cooked by a person in the kitchen, usually a woman, and it has to be fresh, it has to be made right now. And I think we lose that excuse the moment we have personal robots that are simply able to assist us, right? I mean, see, what do rich people in India do? The first thing they can afford is to hire a cook. That's what everyone does, right? I mean, then they hire nannies. I mean, so this is just how, as technology becomes accessible to everyone, that is when I think it's not too far away that you'll have a simple robot that can cut your vegetables for you and do the cleaning. Right? Those are the pain. See, cooking, people think cooking is the hard part. No, it's the prepping and the cleaning that's the hard part, right? And people really are focused on building robots that can make sure that it's getting the spice. I said, that's not what I want the robot to do. That I will do. You chop and peel the potato, you cut the onion so that I don't have to cry. All that you do, and then I will just do the finishing process for now. Right? And eventually, I think there are now technologies that are coming where you can simply train a robot in the way you cook, and it will learn to replicate that. Right? So it will start to come. I mean, I would expect the next 3 or 4 years to start seeing that at least in fast food restaurants. Yeah, and then it will eventually come home, right? I mean, today we don't see what happens in a fast food kitchen. No cooking happens. It's basically just defrosting and frying,
Assembly.
right? Yeah, yes, assembly, yeah.
So one of the things actually related to this that I wanted to ask you was experiments like the Meal Kitchen.
Yes.
Where it was a robot that would sort of go through your catalog of recipes and then put together a dish based on various ingredient combinations.
Yes.
But then it would come up against a roadblock where the certain part of the recipe that read, brown your onions till a particular point, or work it till it's translucent.
Yeah.
Those were difficult things for the robot to figure.
Yes.
Or whisk till light. Those were instructions that were not clear.
Yeah.
And that's when the machine sort of failed and the dish didn't turn out right. And this is the tweak that they're still trying to add in. And this sort of ties in with your book, what you've been writing about, and the complex nature of recipes and the words used.
Indeed. And it's also about shared cultural knowledge, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, Indian person would say chonk or talip, and people would understand what that is, right? A person in the West may not. So you have to be more, heat the oil to this temperature, add these spices in this order. Whereas I could just say, oh, just do a chonk with, mustard, fenugreek, and jeera. And people would intuitively know that the mustard goes in first, then the jeera, and then the fenugreek, because, they would burn otherwise. So this implicit knowledge is typically what is not captured in recipes, right? Which is why Masala Lab was written to say, to give you that implicit knowledge so that it's easy for you to understand the tacit knowledge required to actually do a recipe, right? When it comes to automation, ultimately, I think now we are not too far away from robots having cameras. And all those things where it's unclear, you feed it 100 YouTube videos and it will learn, right? It's just like how ChatGPT has learnt recipes by indexing all food blogs. I mean, eventually I think these models will ingest videos as well, right? And then learn and from that. So it's only a matter of time, yeah.
But again, coming back to recipes, and this time actually going back to the history of recipes, they have been chronicles of a period of society, of gendered relationships, of that particular point in time when eating habits were a particular way because of, say, colonial enterprise or whatever it was. So historically, what recipes stood for and how they evolved and where they stand today, what is your take on that, and are they relevant anymore?
It's not about relevance. I mean, one is that people significantly overestimate the value of history when it comes to food, right? Because every 50 years we change what we eat, right? Let's take Kerala food for an example, right? You take an avial today, it's going to have carrot, it's going to have beans, it's going to have vegetables. none of which existed in Kerala like 150 years ago. Right? These were all introduced by the British. Um, you can also sort of see that there are many things that we do today that simply would be done very differently with a different flavor profile if you had a wood-fired stove as opposed to an LPG stove. And now the transition from LPG stove to induction will introduce a completely new textures and new ways of cooking and eliminate certain other things that we cannot do and so on. Likewise, I think the fact that we mostly eat rice and wheat, the fact that a parota is one of the most quintessential dishes of Calicut is less than 50, 60 years old. The parota is not native to Calicut at all. It actually originally came from Sri Lanka, then to Tamil Nadu, and then eventually here in the So people old enough in Kerala would remember a time when parotas were not available. And so, in fact, wheat consumption is relatively new in South India, right? As a result of colonial policies during World War II, introduction of rava and maida and all of these things to make up for the shortcomings of wheat. Right? So, for example, rice itself, if you look at the older texts, right? Most common people ate millets. Rich people ate rice once in a while. Rice was seen as a very special thing, right? But then you have a food security system that the British set up, that the Indians inherited. So now, ration shop, you don't get millets. Like we can say all millet, year of the millet, right? You don't get millets at the ration shop, right? And most people don't want millets either. At least if they just want something that they can cook easy. Millets are for rich people to posture that I am eating millets, it's ancient food and all that. Ultimately, let's be honest, millets taste terrible. They taste like cardboard, okay? You want to fool yourself that it tastes good because it's good for the planet, it's high fiber, it's healthy. All of that is true, but it tastes terrible. So, yeah, so if you've been traditionally eating millets like the farmers of, ragi farmers of Karnataka and that region, or thinai, like people in Tamil Nadu and so on, yeah, that's traditional. But if it so happened, like in Bengal and Bihar, that opium cultivation eliminated millets cultivation 150 years ago, and now you can't tell those peasants to go back to eating millets. Or you back it up with rich people willing to pay a premium for those millets, and so that will convince farmers to grow those things and so on. So I think people take history far more seriously, and that too without understanding a lot of this history is highly speculative and not really certain, right? All you have, if you've seen recipes from the past, they're not really quarter teaspoon cardamom, 1 teaspoon this, no, there's just literally two sentences. Oh, you add these ingredients and that's it, right? Literally 2 sentences is the recipe, right? So, history is whatever people want to make of it in the context of their own identity and all of that. So, I fundamentally think our relationship with food will change once, it already is changing, right? So, good chunk of what we eat today is not stuff that we cook in our kitchens. This statement would make no sense to someone in 1920. Said, what does that even mean? Because we come from a culture where eating food from someone else is not acceptable in a caste system standpoint. But now you can go buy a chips packet, you can buy a donut, you can buy. So processed food and all the other health problems that come with it is a completely new concept. Who knows what this will look like when I can perhaps get a robot cooked Paragon biryani. Either 3D printed at my home or something. What does it even look like? We won't know. And those people will be wondering, oh wow, these backward people in 2023 were sitting and actually cooking biryani. I think we'll find ourselves very surprised. Right? The past always seems funnier to the future. So and we will be laughed at by our future selves.
So where does a recipe book or a recipe on the internet, where does it stand today? What does it work for? Who does it work for?
I think so. There are still people who, in a sense, want to suddenly replicate something that historically the way to do that was to go find. Let's say, 15 years ago, I want to make a Oriya dish, right? Only way for me to do that is to go find a blog, right, of somebody who has documented it, and hopefully in English, and then I just follow that. And because that was simply the default behavior for so long, we somehow think that's the way to do it, right? And then what happened? YouTube happened. So then people are like, no, why would I sit and read and interpret when I can watch someone cook? So the next logical step is literally that video thing will become a lot more immersive. It might become a robot. It might become some automation. So fundamentally, I would rather focus on the meta knowledge of what that dish is and what it's made of and what are the different steps. So in that sense, a recipe is a piece of knowledge. How we consume it was via text at some point of time, via video during our time, and maybe in a completely different way, right? 5 years from now. But it'll still be a recipe, but it's just that its representation might fundamentally change.
So another thing that I really wanted to ask you is that, again, since your book and your widely popular Instagram page and all the people that you interact with, it's a whole spectrum of India that you are interacting with.
Yes.
And there are questions, there are comments, there's engagement. What have you learned from this about Indian food in general, food habits in general?
Yes.
And the second part of this is, has this changed your focus in any way? Have you started looking at topics that are of interest or that are relevant today to this larger India?
No, it's quite interesting. So on a lighter note, my favorite category of person I interact with on Instagram is, Masala Lab is a book. So the vast majority of people who follow me on Instagram do not read. They just watch reels and videos. And a small number of them are really potential book buyers, if you will, and that's a good thing, right? So see, the thing, the interesting thing about publishing and social media, the scale of social media is like 1,000 times bigger than the scale of publishing, right? The number of people who can read a discretionary, well-written, literary, published book in India, a very tiny number of people. I mean, I'd hesitate to throw any kind of number. I'd be surprised if it's more than 10 million out of a population of 1.4 billion, right? Out of a population that ostensibly 300 million are supposed to be able to understand English. But I'd be surprised if more than 10 million people is the net sum of an English publisher's target market. That's like a third of the population of Canada. Okay. So in that sense, I think, one is that. So you run into a part of India that is significantly more diverse than anyone I'm likely to meet in a Jaipur Lit Fest or a KLF. In fact, one of the things I really love about KLF is that it's not that snooty Lit Fest audience. It's actually just real people, right? From all walks of life. And that goes to, Kerala's investments in, literacy and social equality. And so more people read books in Malayalam. There are more sessions in Malayalam than, and this is not true even in Bangalore Lit Fest. And so it's very different, right? So in that sense, I think, but there still exists a world outside this on social media that is probably not sitting and reading books at all, right? And so there is that audience. The second aspect of this is that you truly experience in your face, sometimes negatively and positively, the scale of India's diversity, right? In many ways. So for example, I just posted I had some roll somewhere, and I just wanted to tell people that look how cheap, ridiculously cheap this place is, right? I mean, there's a 40 rupees, beef roll and, 35 rupees chicken roll and all of that. In fact, one person commented, 35 rupees for a chicken roll. Are you sure that's not pigeon? Is what I said. No, this is not. It's calicut. It's actually quite cheap. The food is great. But the more amazing thing is that predictable number of 10 people from, and to be fair, some of them are good faith. They're like people from North India who just first time discovering that there's a world of India outside where they came from. And they're immediately like, oh my God, why are they selling beef? I'm like, well, South India has been consuming beef for the longest amount of time. This is not a thing here, right? It is a thing where you came from, and I appreciate that. But surely it's an educational moment for you that there exist people in the same country who have completely different eating habits, right? And those eating habits are products of geography, of trade, just as your eating habits are product of your geography, your history and trade, and these are very different, right? So in that sense, I think, the sheer scale and diversity of people, and you also then experience the fact that people get very deeply offended when a food practice that they grown up is not followed by someone else, or somebody else says that that's not a good thing, right? I mean, very limited example. The number of Hyderabadis who got so offended that Bengalis will put potato in their biryani is just insane. Or that the Calicut people do not use basmati rice and that they use this other, what you might call a superior rice to basmati. So people take food so seriously and they get so offended when they discover something new. And also you realize that it is very hard to be adventurous about food. We are all wired to just eat what we grew up eating in our mother's kitchen, and that's it. The vast majority are like that, right? I know all of a sudden social media is forcing you to see very strange things that you've never seen in your life and so on. So the other interesting angle I often experience is the angle of gender, right? And the general tendency is a lot of women saying that this is really nice. I love the fact that pressure cooking does not destroy nutrients. This gives me great relief. I have 3 kids. This is going to save me a lot of time. My mother-in-law told me you're not supposed to use pressure cooker, so it takes me a lot of time, and so really thank you. So that's one side of the story, right? This other side of the story is that literally one guy said you are a modern day Ravana who's out to spoil the traditional Ayurvedic Indian ideas of making women slog in the kitchen, effectively, right? I mean, not in so many words, right? So that basically you sort of see this entire spectrum, and sort of brings me to this wider sense that I've built, which is that in general, when it comes to food, listen to your grandmother, don't listen to your grandfather. Right? So your grandfather is basically the archetype of the WhatsApp uncle who has never stepped foot inside a kitchen, but has opinions about food. So basically what I find is that almost always, so when people ask me, how do I know whether something is true, whether it's fact check or not, I said, first forget science and all of that. Rule number 1, did Uncle Ji say it, or did someone who actually cooks in the kitchen say it? If it is a farmer, please ignore. Right? So it is sort of, I think you run into every kind. And I think I also have this wider observation that India is not united by food, it's divided by food. In that people don't recognize that the more particular you are about eating only what your caste, community, religion, right? All levels. No non-veg, no underground, no halal, no this pork, no that. Every single one of those things is reducing your ability to mingle and eat food that somebody else's cooks, right? And the humanity, the idea of eating someone else's food is one of the most central bonding principles we've had for thousands of years. And that is exactly why the social system here, the only reason caste, community and all of these polarization exists is because additionally, if you can train people to say that these are food habits you must never violate, it's the easiest way for you to maintain those divisions. I mean, like for example, my folks, I mean, I eat everything, but my parents' generation, they're vegetarians. And I often observe that just look at who your friends are and look at where you go eat. Right? It's all only vegetarian people. Because you have to be dreadfully careful. What are they going to cook? Are they going to use the same vessel? Are they going to mingle? Are they going to mix? So we've not gotten to that point where, there's a what we call, there is an increasing level grade of Indian vegetarian intolerance. The most tolerant is, I'm okay to eat at a non-veg restaurant. I might occasionally even taste some egg. That is the most tolerant vegetarian. The other end is, I will not eat at a table where non-veg is being served, is the other end of the spectrum, right? And India has every sort of, yeah. So this in a sense has always been a tremendous learning experience on a day-to-day basis. And for me, in fact, as you said, is it changing the way I put out my content and all that? Actually, no. I'm like consciously saying that I do not want to pander to any single group. I do not want to pander to just the young tech bros who are like, yo, science, tradition is trash. I don't want to pander to that, right? Because I also want to understand why people believe in traditional beliefs, right? If you want to change people's minds, you cannot tell them by starting that you're unscientific and you're wrong, right? You have to understand why people believe the things they believe and then explain it to them on their own terms, right? But science education is not about taking science as a shoe and slapping people with it, right? It's got to be a little bit more persuasive. Yeah.
I think that's one of the last things I want to ask you, which is you have a son.
Yes.
A lot about food apart from the science, is myth making, storytelling. It's this wide world of culture, nostalgia, all of that.
Yeah.
How do you translate this world for your son without making it just about molecules and formula and keep the
True.
stories in place?
So again, as someone who's, again, small, I believe 6% of Indians marry someone outside their community. I'm in that 6%. So I married a Malayali. I'm from Tamil Nadu. And my folks are vegetarian. My wife is Malayali. So yeah, it goes without saying, right? A kind that literally says that I'm not eating at a vegetarian restaurant. So that is the kind of person. If I'm going out to eat, why am I eating at a vegetarian restaurant? So our son obviously is like, on the one hand, grandmothers are competing to teach Tamil and Malayalam, make sure that they like each other's food, and so on. There's some interesting moments. My son is like, goes to my mother and says that, why do you not eat chicken? It's so tasty, and so on. But now my mother's learned to not get offended at that. And I think in a sense, more than the son learning, I think the grandparents are learning more from the younger generation than the other way around. The other interesting thing I also see is that right now we've just sort of slowly, my wife has reached the point where I find he will not cause an LPG explosion, so we can trust him to do something that, at least my wife's family does, which is no matter what dish you cook, it's okay. It can be improved by frying one egg and adding to the top of it. It's a very universal idea. So that job is my son's. So we cook everything is done. Hey, we call him and say, yes, time for you to do your thing. He will break the egg, fry it, and top your dish with it. And so that's. So, but I in a sense, I do see that the world is going to change so rapidly. But in fact, I think by the time he grows up, the world of how we cook, the world of automation and AI, and our relationship with food, I think will change. So I don't want to burden this generation with any more assumptions that, somehow this is all great, you must learn all of this. The only thing I want to give him is a sense of curiosity at wanting to try and be open to eat anything. Once you have that, you can then learn all the rest of it, right? If you're just innately curious, right? I mean, as a child, obviously he will not eat anything that is green in color. It has to be deep fried. It has to be. So that is just being a kid, right? But the general idea is to not have ideas of purity, impurity, disgusting, non-disgusting. As I said, I mean, I will eat anything that is legal to eat. So that should be the only rule. That it should not be an endangered animal. Other than that, I think it should be okay to sort of eat anything. As long as that curiosity is there, then all the rest he will figure out. I don't think there's anything that I can teach that he will not figure out in the new world that he is going to live, that we will not live in. Yeah.
And I think that's a valid lesson for children and everybody in this country going forward. So I think we can open this up for questions now.
Hello, my name is Krishna. It's a two-part question that I have to ask you. Do you think having social media is necessary today to propagate your ideas? And the second part is that, what would you tell people who stay away from it, fearing distraction?
So I think if you personally ask me, I've gone from being a social media optimist to being a social media pessimist. So in the sense that I don't think there is net social media, I think is bad for humanity is what I believe. That said, I also believe that if I did not have social media presence, Penguin would have not have given me a publishing contract. Right? So it's pretty obvious that they're like, yeah, he already has an audience, so we can at least convince him to sell it to some 2,000 to 3,000 of his followers. That's the general thinking. So there are commercial interests where we believe that, well, this generation, just like how our parents' generation, mass medium was television, social media is our generation's medium, mass medium. But it's weirdly different from TV in that it's also mass personalized. Right? Everybody saw the same TV, but everybody has their own social media. You go to YouTube, you see different set of things. You see content that confirms to your biases. So in that sense, it's different. But to someone who is not on social media, I would just say this. If you are if your career depends on reaching a large number of people, you have no choice. But if it does not, then stay away from it. Nothing good comes out of it. In fact, if you're a scientist, if you're anyone who needs to apply your mind, stay away from social. Anyone who needs any kind of focus more than 90 seconds, please stay away from social media. Yes.
Hello, sir. My name is Ahmed, and I've come all the way from Coimbatore.
Yeah.
And I must be honest enough to say that yours is the story that I keep reposting in my status.
Ah, nice. Thank you.
But I have to ask you this. You are now in an all-out war against these social media influencers who take up one ingredient and demonize it.
Yes.
And you are, how far are you able to make a dent in their propagation?
I think it is hard to say. But if I had to be, in all humility, I think there is a million times more bullshit than non-bullshit on social media. And it is that it is really impossible. The algorithms are not optimized, are not designed or incentivized for fact checking. The algorithms are incentivizing scaremongering, right, in food and in any other area, right? So until the incentives change, I don't think I myself or just a single digit number of people who are trying to not demonize and bring nuance and say, hey, you know what, I think the problem is not whether you're eating maida parota or atta parota. The problem is whether you're eating 3 parotas or 1 parota, right? So, and things like that, right? That, you know, there's no point if you're eating Maggi with vegetables and an egg and you're doing it once a week. It is perfectly fine. And if you're a bachelor, if you're a mother with like 2 kids and all of that, I think the sense of shame and anxiety that this kind of influencer work tells people, and people, Indians, right, don't trust institutions. Indians trust individuals. Somebody with a beard and 1 million followers, people will believe them blindly, right? And it includes me too, right? I sometimes get people that you tell me whether this is true, I will believe you blindly. I said, that's a problem. Right? So you can't believe me blindly. But so therefore, I really think that the mental health side of that is probably more important, in that if people have to truly focus on their health, they cannot be worried about whether maida is bad, whether palm oil is bad, etc., etc. That's a complete. So it is funny because I looked at newspaper archives from letters to the editor, the Hindu, and all of that from 70 years ago. And there's also a fascinating book called "In Our Days There Was No Filter Coffee" by A.R. Venkatachalapati. Right? He looks at what people, Uncle G's like us, were screaming about 70 years ago. You know what they were saying? All this coffee is spoiling our generation. There's all these people who are drinking coffee, it is very bad. People using pressure cooker and gas stove. We are not getting the flavor of that, and using grinders instead of, doing that stone. So that is what people were concerned with 70 years ago. And so it's the same thing. Right? People will resist all of these changes and want to find some enemy. And this is the easy one. The hard thing to do is to eat less food. Instead of that, people will do everything. I will avoid maida. I will avoid Maggi. I will avoid all of that. But then you will eat millet biryani. Same amount, more oil, because millet tastes bad, so they add more oil. Millet biscuits people buy. People buy halwa, but with karupatti sugar. Boss, same glycemic index, same sugar. You are convincing yourself it is healthy. It's a dessert. Right? So I think, it's just that unless we recognize that fallacy, we will fall for these influencers. So yeah, I think they will be there because the platform is able to monetize and give them a career in spreading misinformation and scaring.
Well, thank you so much, Krish. And while we can, I think now we should go to Paragon and eat biryani, still cooked
Absolutely.
by humans.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.